By the middle of the 1920s, I was established as a designer in the graphic arts, with enough leading advertisers seeking my services to fill all my time, and enough work on periodicals and books to sweeten the mixture a little. But something in the air of the time was making me dissatisfied and bored with the work I was doing.
The 20 years in the field that had provided Teague with establishment and success was now the source of his restlessness. In his midlife, Teague was not in a position to take risks. He had a family to provide for, bills to pay, and clients with expectations. At this point, the world of art and design was making some exciting changes. Teague had to make a choice: continue on the path of security and monotony, or evolve.
When I think about the foundation or the roots of industrial design in the whole world, America was the first. And I just think of Teague as being one of the innovators in that context and doing lots of interesting work that influenced the whole of the way that people thought about design of everyday things from that moment forward.
And with his sense of controlled aesthetic, brings some wonderful, elegant products into being that ends up becoming household products that, some of the things that are just iconic forms that are just amazing.
History books speak little about the man behind these iconic designs. As an industrial designer myself, my perception of him was a kind of mysterious great-grandfather. A modest man, Teague left few details about who he was and his reinvention of himself into an industrial designer. Though Teague never wrote an autobiography, an illustration found in the Teague archives provides a clue about his crucial period of transformation. An announcement that he illustrated shows a depiction of himself illuminated by rays of light. The drawing, dated 1926, was created the year before Teague established himself as a pioneer in the field of industrial design.
When I was going to school in the pretty little town of Pendleton, Indiana, about the turn of the century, my daily walks took me past two flourishing livery stables: Bill Walker's on the west side, John Lewark's on the east side, of a community scarcely big enough to have two sides. The town also had 2 or 3 busy blacksmith shops and a carriage painter. Then there were a harness maker, dealers in hay, grain, and feed, a couple of veterinary surgeons, and an agent for Studebaker farm wagons. All these in one incredibly quiet little village of 1,500 people.
Walter was the youngest of 5 brothers and sisters. With his father and mother, 7 of them had crammed into a tiny, modest house, walls filled with books. Walter was not the typical small-town farm boy. He spent most of his time reading, or drawing, or painting, or taking pictures or writing. He devoured books and admired authors. And even at 13 years old, he kept a detailed log of every book that he had read in his diary.
He understood because he read a lot. He read voraciously. He intentionally read. He notes in a foreword that he wrote that you can't judge a person or their influences by this list. You have to understand that I also read periodicals, I read newspapers, I read reviews, and none of those are listed here. So he understood that there was a big wide world out there, and he was ambitious.
Attuned to the proper fashion of the times, a young Teague preferred to dress like a little gentleman rather than a small-town Midwestern boy. Walter's father was a Methodist minister circuit rider, traveling to various churches in the rural countryside on horseback. He conducted services and preached to the small congregations. He was close to his parents, who, in spite of being poor, encouraged him to pursue his interests and talents, instilling the attitude that with hard work and perseverance, anything was possible. Modesty, letting your work speak for itself, discipline, empathy, respect, dignity, these were the values imbued in the Teague house, and values that would shape his life. Walter's father struggled to earn enough as a minister to provide for his entire family. To supplement their income, he worked as a tailor and sold books on the side. But all this work was taking its toll, and Walter's father was getting ill.
In the night of Thursday, January 19th, I drew a picture required in my physical geography lesson. When it was completed, I went downstairs from my room and showed it to Father. "Yes," he said, "that is very nice." Those were the last words he ever spoke to me.
His father had a stroke. It was his second one. And after struggling to hold on for 3 more days, he died with Walter by his side.
Tuesday, January 25th. It has blown very hard all day, and there was hail and rain this morning, and it is cold now. Sighing of the wind, a flash of lightning and clap of thunder, the patter of falling rain, all tend to make one feel how small and insignificant he is. Today I was thinking of 100 years from now, when like a flash came over me in the remembrance that then I will be but a memory. My grave will have sunken, the old moss-covered stone lain down beside it, and the long-cherished hopes and ambitions unknown by the world. But I forget I am just a boy, and have my life before me yet. So I will strive to make the name I bear a loved one, long after my soul has departed for lands unknown.
In high school, he had a natural talent for drawing. He frequently drew pictures of his friends and family, and drew maps and illustrations for his school class. Then one day, in the high school library, he found a book of the great architecture of the world. Not only were the buildings amazing, but the illustrations were masterful. And Walter was so inspired by these drawings of fantastic structures that he knew what he wanted to do. He was going to become a great artist. To be an artist required training, which in turn required money, and that was something the family didn't have. art could always be a hobby, supported by a stable job in town. But the safe path would not lead him to the influence he craved and admired in his favorite writers, artists, and architects. Finances would not hold him back. He would find a way. After he finished high school, he worked at the Pendleton newspaper as much as he could. He worked hard all day, and soon that diligence paid off. And his employer doubled his salary from $1.50 to $3 a week. And he saved every bit that he could. Walter knew he needed to be at the heart of the art world. He may have read about the Art Students League in New York City, where he could be trained. So his plan was to earn as much money as he could, and then take the biggest risk he's ever taken in his life. After a year of hard work, Walter had frugally saved $70, $35 to buy a train ticket to New York, and $35 in his pocket.
I think that from his point of view, he wanted to influence the world. And I'm understanding that right as I'm speaking this, because I think that that is the key perhaps to him going to New York, is that he realized that in order to be the best that he could, he had to have that challenge.
His mother, a talented tailor herself, made him this three-piece suit for his departure. This photo, taken right before Walter left Pendleton, shows that this was a proud moment for him and his family. This was likely Walter's first time leaving his hometown. And his route would take him through the familiar farm country of Indiana and through Ohio. But soon after entering Pennsylvania, he would have seen for the first time the sooty, smoking, mechanical heart of the Industrial Revolution.
The pure physical hideousness the factories spread around us was worse than anything the world has ever seen. The Industrial Revolution filled the land with sprawling, planless cities, devoid of any trace of urbanity. That it formed these cities, largely of shoals of jerry-built slums, which were uncomfortable and ungracious at their best, and positively lethal at their worst. It accepted as a matter of course that the new industrial system, on which the whole scheme of life was based, should proliferate in sinister black factories that blighted the lives of their workers and the countrysides they invaded.
Walter knew no one in New York and had no place to stay. So he walked through a hectic Manhattan until he found the YMCA on 23rd Street. Since he didn't have much money, he made a deal with the manager to work at the Hat Chick in exchange for room and board. There he met a young man named John Brophy, and they quickly became friends. Little did he know that, years later, John would play a major role in his design business. The Art Students League was, as it is today, an atelier school, where art is taught through the immersion and practice of drawing, painting, printmaking, and sculpture. The master artists that taught there were well respected and accomplished, having been trained in the great European schools. This is where Teague studied figure drawing and anatomy especially. He was in his element, absorbing everything that he could, relishing the pleasure of creating beautiful drawings and paintings. He was focused on his work until one day, across the studio,
Cecil was, and I knew Cecil quite well, a wonderful, quiet person. She was they met at Art Students League, and I have rather beautiful notebooks of her drawings, and I think I have ones of Walter's drawings of her from that period. Their style, the Art Students League style was apparent in both of them. You know, they were learning to draw beautifully.
As Walter and Cecil Fayen shared their love of art, their love for each other developed, and soon they were married. In addition to working at the YMCA, Teague found work painting signs. He also used his illustration skills in drawing for mail order catalogs. Although he loved art, he didn't want to be a fine artist. He was practical, and he needed a way to support himself and his young wife. After various freelance jobs as an illustrator, he got a job at a small advertising agency to do drawings for their print ad campaigns. Teague's boss, Walter Whitehead, recognized his talent, and when he saw an opportunity to move up to the top ad agency on Madison Avenue, he took Teague with him. Ernest Calkins and Ralph Holden were advocates of using form, visualization, and design to advertising, and they were experienced at bringing in high-profile clients and holding on to them. Teague joined this prestigious firm in 1908 as an illustrator and a typographer, designing and drawing decorative and elaborate ads. But this wasn't just a job. Not only was Teague building a reputation, but this was also a new stage in his education. This is where he learned professionalism and business savvy. Teague learned how to nurture relationships with prominent corporate clients. He worked diligently and watched closely, as he would soon apply these lessons to the future of his own business. At 28 years old, Teague decided to strike out on his own and become a freelancer. He subletted the tiny office from Frederick Goudy, the famous type designer. He worked on projects for advertising and began to develop a base of clients. Teague became well known for creating intricate classical borders. Each of these borders were planned and measured out in pencil, and then meticulously inked by hand. His borders became so successful that others began to imitate the style. Eventually, any advertising decorative border became known as a Teague border. Not only was business growing for Teague, but so was his family. They first lived in an apartment on Morningside Drive in Manhattan, but now that they needed more space and respite from the city, Teague had built a home in Forest Hills Gardens, Queens. Then, his peaceful life was interrupted. In 1917, the United States entered World War I. And Teague joined the 9th Coast Artillery National Guard, protecting New York water supplies. From artillery back to advertising, Teague continued with his illustration business, and by 1921 he had many prestigious clients.
Walter had developed a healthy business relationship with several advertising agencies. It was a time when advertisers used illustrations with dashing, very often with dashing 20s models, male and female, and with cars like Packards and Pierce Arrows. Such advertisements often had distinctive borders framing the illustrations. Walter Teague was the borderman par excellence in this field.
He had become a well-known artist for industry by this time, and his work was selected to be exhibited at the annual Industrial Art Exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1922.
By the middle of the 1920s, I was established as a designer in the graphic arts, with enough leading advertisers seeking my services to fill all my time, and enough work on periodicals and books to sweeten the mixture a little. But something in the air of the time was making me dissatisfied and bored with the work I was doing.
He would have read about the International Decorative Arts Exposition in Paris, heralding modern art, fashion, sculpture, and architecture, ushering in a new spirit of design, not based on historical periods, but rather inspired by the machine and geometric forms.
A lot of American companies learned by going to the 1925 Decorative Art Show in Paris that how bad American products were. Because you think of the United States in the first 20 years of the century as the China of that part of the century, a cheap way to get things done in mass. And we were good at doing stuff, but we were crappy at aesthetics and finish and a sensibility of a modern machine aesthetic.
Every aspect of the arts was experiencing transformation. George O'Keeffe, Joseph Stella were pushing the bounds of art. Le Corbusier was changing the conventions of architecture. Count Basie and Benny Goodman were swinging the city into the Jazz Age. It was the time when Fitzgerald, Hemingway, and the lost generation of writers were challenging the traditions of literature. The world of business was changing too, as companies wondered how they could redesign their products to appeal to the new modern American. Teague was surrounded by a world that was quickly changing. Could he transform too? And what is it that he would become? In 1926, Teague was at a creative dead end. But then, within the next year, he transforms into a pioneer in a new field. What inspired this? Where did the vision come from? Soon I discovered that Teague explained it himself in a talk given in London.
A few people asked me to do some packages. A piano manufacturer asked me to design 2 or 3 grand pianos. A leading automobile manufacturer asked me to sketch a new line of cars with their color schemes. These projects were novel, and I found them stimulating.
Teague found new energy in solving these problems and wondered if he could do this as a new career path. So he decides that he needs to stop what he's doing, to take a break and get away. So he closes his office and books a trip on an ocean liner to Europe. Was it to see the work of modernists in the Bauhaus in Germany? No. What he really wanted to experience was much different and far older. He was on a pilgrimage to study the most magnificent examples of Gothic architecture. So what is this statue in the illustration? Well, when I visited Harry Teague's office, he pulled this old film out of his basement.
In the Cathedral of Chartres, here is refinement that makes no detraction from strength. Here is grace and subtlety and variety achieved with a scheme of perfect simplicity. The statues on the west portals of Chartres, probably the most perfect adaptation of sculpture to architecture ever accomplished, are elongated but attenuated human figures, and their scale is repeated in slender columns that complete the porches. Means were found to compose practically every great mass in a Gothic cathedral out of smaller elements, humanized elements, without loss of major unity or any blurring of vertical direction. The Gothic builders were cunning in extracting the utmost possible emotional effect from their great structures, both inside and out. They were exploring newly discovered engineering principles, just as we are doing, and embodying them in a work of clear definition and great power, just as we are endeavoring to do.
These 3 names, Levin, Agnes, Rebu, who were they? Well, in Paris in the 1920s, Caroline Rebu was a famous fashion designer who specialized in women's hats. And Jean Levin and Agnes were also well-known Parisian fashion designers, so this shows Teague's appreciation for fashion design and his own taste for distinctive clothing. And it points back to his parents' work as tailors. This is something I found in the Teague archives, and he writes a number of influences, things that were really significant to him. Some of them I've figured out.
Well, it's interesting to look at. One of the things that's interesting is to look at Louis XIV. And Louis XIV was really, I look at the issue of brand and great emperors or rulers were basically like CEOs, and they would usually create a brand identity. And Louis XIV, the Sun King, probably in the history of France, there's no greater CEO of a brand. Created Versailles, created a whole cultural aesthetic around the quality of bringing his court outside of Paris, creating its own rules and regulations. So it was a whole systematic approach to defining his power and bringing people in that had to get certified and approved. So the fact that that's an influence for him means that he understood the power of that comprehensive design. He did a combination of designer and then richer, deep background into the history and came away with a greater cultural sensibility.
Teague returned home with a new direction, a new purpose. He was getting messages of change and transformation from the world of art, design, and business. He decides to transform himself into something that hadn't been defined yet. He was to become a new kind of architect, not one who designs buildings, but of beautiful tools for living. A new kind of craftsman, not one who crafts by hand, one at a time, but one who crafts by machine, thousands at a time. A new kind of designer, not one who designs clothing or advertisements, but one that designs products for industry, an industrial designer, bringing into an ugly, chaotic world a little order and beauty, affecting people through the products they use every day. Teague's first big opportunity to do so was with Eastman Kodak. The company realized that they needed to improve the appeal of their basic black cameras to stay competitive. So Eastman sent his vice president to Manhattan and found Mr. Teague.
The Eastman Kodak Company representative told me that they had decided to entrust me with the redesign of 2 of their popular cameras. I told Eastman that I knew next to nothing about cameras, that I could only undertake the assignment if I could do the work in their own factory, working with their engineers, and I would need a year's contract for 1 week a month. And I set a fee high enough to make sure that my opinions would be respected. Within less than 18 months after joining Eastman, all my time was taken up by exciting new adventures in industrial design.
Teague approached the problem by putting himself in the mind of the customer, and this was much more than just a superficial application of art. He was designing the customer's experience and elevating the brand, and he knew that the customers were often women. And in designing a new version of the Kodak Vest Pocket series, Teague used his knowledge of the state of current fashions and added attractive colors using high-gloss enamel. The new Vanity Kodak was now available in 5 distinct colors, and each was packed with a matching satin-lined box. Teague also brought Art Deco and modernist design elements into the lives of ordinary Americans. On the 1930 number 1A gift camera, he used lacquered enamels and modern rectilinear designs, and cameras changed from utilitarian devices to beautiful compact technology. Also in 1930, Teague redesigned the low-cost number 2 Brownie box camera. Previously a black jute-board box, Teague designed the lacquered faceplate of rectilinear colors and lines. The number 2 Bow Brownie was available in 6 colors. Teague had elevated the humble Brownie camera to a collectible fashion accessory and the most spectacular of all the box cameras. Back in Indiana, Teague met with automotive engineer Colonel Marmon. Marmon had been engineering automobiles since 1902, and it was his car, the Marmon Wasp, that won the inaugural Indianapolis 500 in 1911. Colonel Marmon wanted Teague to design the exterior and interior of a new luxury car. He wanted to pair his advanced engineering with Teague's refined elegance to create the world's most advanced luxury vehicle. Teague invited his son Dorwin to participate in the design, for he had just started studying engineering at MIT and was an auto racing fanatic and a driving enthusiast. They worked together on the project as Dorwin traveled from Boston on the weekends, but the two were in constant friction and disagreement over the design.
He knew what was going on with car design in a way my grandfather didn't, but that my father was the one who really did the design of the cars, and that it's probably, accurate to say that Walter, whose motif was the octagon at that point, was adding octagons were driving my father crazy.
Dorwin's influence was to incorporate aerodynamics, smooth curves, and remove any decorative elements in the spirit of racing and performance, yet his father drove to imbue distinction and elegance into the design. The conflict of these two forces resulted in a technologically advanced yet beautiful automobile. All the exterior components, except the headlights, were moved within the body enclosure. Even the radiator cap was put under the hood. Although in the first model, the sales department insisted on leaving it on the exterior, where people expected it to be.
What Dorwin really did was cleaned it up and unified the belt line and made it all one thing. And the visual comparison in design this day puts it up against the Cadillac of the same year, and you see exactly what they were aiming at. The Cadillac is still all sort of mechanical side louvers and those drip sills around the windows and everything, and it looks like a bunch of individual pieces joined together, whereas Marmon looks like a unity.
The problem was the timing couldn't have been worse. The country was in the depths of the Great Depression and not the time for luxury cars. Only 400 of the Marmon 16 were ever produced. And today, a Marmon 16 is worth over $750,000, and very few still exist. Dorwin is proud of his work and wanted the credit for the design. But the policy in the industrial design business was that the design is always credited to the head of the office, his father.
But, again, it was a Teague. Colonel Marmon didn't want to know that Walter's 19-year-old son at MIT designed the car. He wanted a Teague design for the car.
Well, I think the practice of the lead designers who found consulting companies using their own name has continued to this day. Just for the value of recognition, to have a single name that people remember is an easy way of promoting an organization. So you can see the good sense in terms of advertising and promotion.
This enraged Dorwin. Why should his father get all the credit? This was the bitter conflict that drove the father and son even further apart. The Steuben Glass Company had been going through difficult times. It had been bought by Corning Glassworks, and they hired Teague to refocus the direction of the company's products. For many years under its founder, Frederick Carter, Steuben had specialized in colored glass pieces. Yet Teague felt that it was time to break from tradition. His direction was to use Corning's new glass formulation, a highly refractive, colorless lead crystal. and although his tenure at Steuben was only 2.5 years long, he designed over 60 pieces. Today, his work is now highly revered among glass collectors and museums. Also during this time, Teague continued his work with Eastman Kodak. The original Kodak Brownie camera was launched in 1900. Targeted at children as budding photographers, it was named after a popular children's book character. Made from jute board and wood, it was sold for less than $1. In the 1930s, the technology of molded plastic using a phenolic resin called bakelite was being developed. This new manufacturing process allowed for complex shapes to be produced with precision at high quantities and low cost. For durability and longevity, Teague designed the new tiny camera for Kodak, the Baby Brownie. The Baby Brownie was introduced in 1934 and was also sold for $1.
Well, for me, I have a little collection of cameras that mostly ones that I've used myself. But the thing that I absolutely had to collect, because it was such a classic design, was the Brownie. And I managed to find one in working order.
It took a 6x4 centimeter picture and was only 2.5 inches tall. So compact that many World War II soldiers took it with them on their tour of duty. The design of the molding allows for the camera to be made with integrated internal features, minimizing the need for additional parts. It can be opened up and easily loaded with roll film. Successful designs like this led to more projects, and all this work meant that he needed to hire others to help. His office on 210 Madison Avenue, which was really just a large residential apartment, was becoming too small. So he leased the next 2 apartments and tore down the walls between them. At this point, he had architects, engineers, draftsmen, and businessmen assisting him. In 1933, Teague met Edsel Ford of the Ford Motor Company family. Ford gave Teague the ambitious project of designing an exhibition for the Chicago Century of Progress Exposition in 1933 and 34. Working with architect Albert Kahn, this exhibition was the most popular of the fair. Inside, the entire process of manufacturing an automobile was described and demonstrated. They even poured molten metal and welded steel chassis in front of a fascinated crowd. From raw materials to parts to finished assemblies. The success of this project leads to more exhibition and pavilion design projects for the series of American World Fairs of the Depression era. The following year, he designs the Ford Pavilion for the California Pacific Exposition in San Diego of '35. approaching the exhibit design as a means for telling a story and not just a display of facts, improving the flow and the experience for the visitors. Then for the Dallas Centennial Exposition in '36, he gains DuPont, National Cash Register, and the Texas Oil Company. He and his designers closely watched how visitors experienced and moved through the exhibit and worked to improve their appeal. Ongoing effort to modernize and redesign their ancient passenger cars, the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad employed Teague and his growing staff to design new, comfortable, and clean cars. Typical passenger cars of the time were ornate wooden boxes made by skillful carpenters. And although they were comfortable, they were also dark, heavy, difficult to clean, and covered in decorative molding. Teague looked to new materials like stainless steel and aluminum for the structure and the exterior. And he incorporated a fresh application of colors. On the exterior, Teague eliminated moldings and projections, rounded the ends, made the doors and windows flush, and shaped them as tubular sections, reducing drag from side winds. The cars were air-conditioned and sealed from the smoky outside air. And all these elements had the effect of cheerful cleanliness and modern comfort. In 1934, Teague began an extensive multi-product design contract with the Spark Withington Radio Company. They commissioned Teague to create a radically modern design for the radio cabinets. Because at this time, radios were just that, wooden cabinets designed to imitate living room furniture. So Spartan gave Teague the freedom to imagine what a radio could be. This project led to the most daring designs that Teague had ever created. And Spartan was so excited about them that they released a teasing advertisement with the new radios hidden under silk covers. The Nocturne is a dramatic visual presence, a gleaming modern sculpture that you could use and listen to. Today it's considered a masterpiece of Art Deco modern, and it is one of the most desired radios among collectors, worth well over $40,000. Also part of this collection was the smaller Spartan model 566 Bluebird radio. Teague was careful not to simply scale the Nocturne down, but rather make it its own design with a family resemblance.
Then you see the Bluebird radio, and such a contrast, so suddenly simple and dramatic, a really strong departure from what was the norm at the time.
and although not introduced until later in 1936, Teague had also designed a more conventional yet striking radio chassis called the Model 557, also known as the sled radio. The success of these projects was making Teague into a New York celebrity, and the press was taking notice. The industrial designer was the new key to business success. So it was at this time that Fortune magazine gave him the title of Dean of Design. At this time, Teague was hitting his stride with camera design and created his most exquisite camera design ever, the Kodak Bantam Special. Although some modernists criticize his use of decorative striping, Teague defended his metal stripes as not merely decorative but functional elements, protecting the gloss enamel from scratching, cracking, and scuffing. In the mid-30s, as automobiles became more common and roadways improved, a weekend drive became an enjoyable American excursion. What was not enjoyable, however, were the gas service stations. Sometimes they were a general store outfitted with gas pumps, or you might be able to fill up at the mechanic's garage, but they were typically hard to find, dirty, ramshackle operations, and rarely had a restroom. The Texas Oil Company's brand of gasoline was sold nationwide in the 30s. However, they were concerned with who was selling that gasoline and how it was delivered to the customer. Teague and his staff created a standard design that would be consistent throughout the country. Clean, organized, attractive, these service stations were easily recognizable from the road and easily maintained. But to the newly mobile American family, the most important feature was the clean and reliable men's and ladies' restrooms. Beginning in 1937, Texaco began building these stations throughout the country, resulting in about 20,000 nationwide by the late 1950s.
From a historic perspective, the idea of releasing architecture from place, which was part of the idea of some of Corbu's ideas and some of the international styles idea, that this was not going to be a regional architecture, that this was going to be an architecture based on something besides place. The people that maybe espoused it from a theoretical point of view, like Corbu, didn't achieve that in a way. To me, this achieved it. It's the same station whether it's in Florida or New York or New Jersey or Texas or California or wherever. You know, it's this same station.
Edwin Land had been working with researchers to develop applications for his new film in the 1930s and was striving to make a successful product. One of those experimental products was a desk lamp that emitted polarized light. This first product was a blocky chunk of bakelite, largely dictated by engineering constraints. Teague, with his staff designer Frank Del Giudice, and Dorwin, took those constraints and imagined a new form, the Polaroid desk lamp number 114. Although one may think that he was imitating the style of streamlining and automobile fenders, the shape of the shade was functional, was based on the mathematical parabola, reflecting light from the bulb at its focus center and downward as parallel rays. The rays pass through the polarized film and then onto the desk surface, reducing glare. And although the lamp was not commercially successful, today it is a collectible design of the machine age. America was still emerging slowly out of the Depression, and Americans were earnestly looking forward to a brighter, more prosperous future. The New York World's Fair of 1939 was shaped to emphasize that future by visionary architects, artists, and industrial designers. Teague served on the board of design for the fair. He fought against the initial theme of American history and encouraged the focus to be an optimistic view of the future, where technology, science, and engineering would lead to the health and well-being of all people. So the theme became the world of tomorrow. Teague and his staff of architects, designers, and engineers designed 8 pavilions and exhibits, more than any other industrial designer. The Eastman Kodak exhibition featured the latest in photographic and motion picture technology. The U.S. Steel Pavilion was called The Building Turned Inside Out, a steel dome with its skeletal structure on the outside.
But there was a big feud going on between the ID and architectural community who regarded this all as sort of jukebox architecture, as I remember the phrase, that they condemned the buildings and so on, which was their snobbiness probably. Up to that point, exhibitions, I think they had a component of that. They had technology in them and new technologies and steam engines and things, but they were very retro. They didn't have the modern, they weren't introducing modern design. That fair introduced the idea of a new aesthetic that went along with this movement, and that was huge.
In the original design of the DuPont Pavilion, the arced cylinder surrounding the tower was covered with panels, but later it was decided to leave the structural lattice exposed. Inside were exhibits about better living through chemistry and the advanced materials that were being developed. Teague designed the interior, the Steinway piano, and the table settings for the United States Federal Pavilion. The crystal glassware designs were used to entertain foreign dignitaries in the state reception room.
So interesting is if you look at the difference between the GM pavilion and the Ford pavilion, and you could see the style that Teague did was to not overplay the story, because Ford is a down-on-the-deck company. So even the inside isn't lush and futuristic. It's information, and it's almost illustrative. The building itself is integrated into a half-mile road. It's very interesting to see, even in the way that he approaches the pavilion, there's a kind of directness of not trying to camouflage Ford in some big, gooey, modernist expression, but making it contemporary.
The fair was incredibly successful, attracting over 44 million visitors. It gave a new public attention to the profession of industrial design. The press raved about them as artist engineers, comparing them to Leonardo da Vinci. And they became emboldened to take on any design task, large or small. In 1940, Teague had organized and wrote down his thoughts and principles about design and published the book, Design This Day, The Technique of Order in the Machine Age.
We are not satisfied unless the things we make have that look of inevitability, of perfect adaptation to a designed end, as found in living things. In this way, the world's craftsmen have been driven to seek patiently harmony of form and function. In the Industrial Revolution, all interests were sacrificed to the accomplishment of a technological advance. It has been an age busy with gigantic problems, absorbing all its powers, ruthless in its reconstruction, having little time or thought for the amenities of life. The machine came between a man and the thing he made. And how could a man take pride in a thing he never touched? The craftsman was forced to give up his own way of working for the more productive way of the machine operator. The period of transformation nears its end. The old crafts are gone, and the new tools grow familiar in our hands. We find ourselves facing a chaotic world, but with incredible powers for constructive action in our hands and vast knowledge in our minds. We have the means, and in spite of all distractions, a vision is growing clear in our minds. A vision of the world as a fair and friendly place, a setting of serenity, peace, and beauty in which men may live a life of equanimity and creative effort.
In 1941, Teague had landed a new project, to design a truck for the White Motor Company. His son Dorwin felt that he should be given the project lead, and arguing that he knew more about automotive and truck design than anybody in the office. But his father refused, and the argument turned into a loud battle in the middle of the drafting room. Teague held his ground and gave the project lead to Bob Ensign instead. Dorwin was relegated to be the chief model maker, but making a model of someone else's design was not the same as designing it. And soon after, he had had enough. Dorwin left his father's firm to pursue an engineering job that paid half of his former salary.
You know, in that photograph you often see of the two of them at the drawing table together, it's painful. You can tell they're not really communicating. So to some degree, He knew he had a talented and precocious son. He just didn't know how to relate to him.
Cecil's role was to produce the children with lineage. And then when he was ready to move on, he sent Cecil on a cruise to the Caribbean, wherein she got this telegram that he sort of surprised Cecil with the announcement that he was going to divorce her.
For unknown reasons, Cecil and Walter's marriage was struggling, and they divorced after nearly 30 years. Then, at 53, Teague married Ruth Mills Holmes.
He met Ruth. I don't know that much about how they met or anything like that, but Ruth was the opposite. She was stylish and wore pants, not skirts, right? You know, was interested in entertaining. The image you get is like Nick and Nora Charles, you know, these satin apartments with martinis and beautiful shakers, and it was very much of that kind of life. And she was wonderful. She was fun.
My grandfather had found somebody in Ruth that was a partner, that a true partner in the sense that in a creative, expansive way, she not only supported him wholeheartedly, but she got him. You know, she totally got who this man was.
During many months of the critical period of the war, we declined to accept any new civilian assignments in order to devote the organization exclusively to war work.
Through World War II, Teague worked with the U.S. Navy. Most of the projects that they did were to improve the operation, ergonomics, and safety of naval weapons. They studied faults in ammunition hoists and 16-inch naval guns that had been backfiring, causing serious casualties among the operators. Teague's engineers studied them, discovered the problems, and designed solutions, making it safe for the servicemen. Rocket launchers, triple-barreled bazookas, gun mounts, and training materials were just some of the many projects that the Teague office designed during the Great War. As the Second World War came to its destructive conclusion, Teague was looking forward to the future of his profession, and now, turning 61 years old, was thinking about the future of his company and the legacy that he would leave behind. Teague and his colleagues, Henry Dreyfuss and Raymond Loewy, gathered together to form a professional society, the Society of Industrial Designers. Its aim was to establish standards of practice and a code of ethics for the profession, and to improve education in industrial design. Mr. Teague was elected to be the first president. The Industrial Designers Society of America continues to serve the profession to this day. Boeing was looking to convert their war aircraft, the C-97 Stratofreighter, into a commercial passenger plane, and needed to convince the airlines that they could deliver a long-range and comfortable aircraft. Teague proposed to Boeing that with their experience on the New Haven Railroad passenger cars, that they could do the design well. He sent partner Frank Del Giudice out to Seattle to work side by side with Boeing. Air travel at that time was still a luxury, and the Boeing Stratocruiser was designed to reflect that status. It had 2 decks and a pressurized cabin, which was a new feature that made transoceanic flights more comfortable. berths for sleeping, and a spiral staircase that led down to the lower lounge. Del Giudice's design was a success, and this established a relationship with Boeing aircraft that continues to this day. By 1946, Teague's office had grown to be among the largest design consultants in the world. With offices in Los Angeles and Seattle, in addition to its New York office on Madison Avenue. To facilitate the growing company, he changed his company into a partnership, now called Walter Dorwin Teague Associates. The large Teague staff continued to do designs and exhibits through the 40s. And although he tried to keep up on all the activities, his role was less involved in the design work and more about being a leader and a spokesman. Teague's son, Dorwin, had returned to the company and worked primarily on engineering accounts. But when another automotive design project came in, he tried again to take the lead.
In 1953, WTA was retained by the Packard Motor Car Company to come up with some new body design concepts. In difficult times, Packard had no inexpensive high-volume line to pay for the overhead and was slowly and inevitably heading for oblivion. A really outstanding body design, it was hoped, might help the company survive. My relations with my father were at a low ebb at this time, so instead of the job coming to me, it went to Bob Harper. I think he wanted to prove to me and to himself that my success with the Marmon 16 was nothing out of the ordinary. Bob had excellent taste and was especially good with furniture design and interiors, but his knowledge of cars was minimal and his ideas for the Packard were pitiful. Finally, I told my father that the Packard account was in trouble and that Harper's ideas were a disaster.
But the other designers on staff saw it differently. Edward Kibble, who was the personnel director at the time, says that Dorwin demanded that he be given the project lead, and when his father refused, Dorwin fought back, the argument echoing through the entire office. Although Teague and his son had difficulty working together, his employees held him as a compassionate boss.
There were more times than not when many projects underway were up against the same deadline, bringing about the need for late hours, and even at times working through the night. There came a time when things became a bit strained on the home front. My wife Flo, left alone to tend to our 9 children, made clear to me her distress. She said there could be fewer late nights at work or that I find a new job. The next morning, I talked with our personnel director about the situation at home. Asked if there was a way that I could take a leave for as long as needed. The following morning, Ed said that Mr. Teague wanted to see me. I went to his office. He told me to have a seat. He said he had heard that the time I was spending at the office was causing some stress at home. He reached across his desk and handed me an envelope and told me reservations for me and my family had been made at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, that he didn't want to see me for 2 weeks, and that the envelope would take care of all expenses. Mr. Teague was a compassionate and generous man.
Walter Teague's offices engendered a certain camaraderie of the personnel and the general ambience that was more likely, I think, in the 50s, and that may be less evident today. There were Christmas parties, active, imaginative parties, and sometimes birthday parties. And then the 4 martini luncheons, so to speak. They were commonplace. It was all in line with the pressures that advertising agencies are noted for, because so many of them were on that street, Madison Avenue.
The office in New York was well run and businesslike. There was a certain underlying discipline, but it was a pleasant place in which to work. The partners were very gentlemanly, and Mr. Teague, although in photos sometimes looked as though he could be stern and tough, was very nice to confer with. He certainly was very good to me. In general, there was a good feeling between the designers and the bullpen. Many of us made friends there which lasted many years.
When Boeing decided to enter the market with their 707, Walter Dorwin Teague and Associates was awarded the contract for the design of the plane's interior.
As staff graphic designer Arch Drummond recalls, the Teague office set to work on the design. They wanted to do something special, something extraordinary, and they didn't want any executives interfering.
It was agreed that the decision makers at Boeing would be kept in the dark about the nature of the presentation until its unveiling.
Months of intense design work ensued in New York.
When it came time for the presentation, the Boeing executives and their wives were picked up at their hotels in Manhattan, driven by limousines to a large building downtown, and drove right onto a large freight elevator. The elevator stopped at the 4th floor and its doors slid open. They stepped out of the limousines and were escorted to a lounge arranged with small cocktail tables, comfortable seating, and a small bar. Across one wall was a maroon velvet drape. Mr. Teague stepped to the front of the curtain. All there had to be wondering what they were in for. What was on the other side of the curtain? A movie? A slideshow? Dancing girls? Mr. Teague began to talk about the scope of the project, the work that had gone into it. Then the curtain slid open. Then the door opened and a stewardess stepped out and said, "The initial flight of the Boeing 77 is ready for boarding. Welcome aboard." All those in the lounge, bewildered, one by one slowly rose to their feet.
And they found themselves inside a full-sized model of the entire aircraft interior, exact to the last detail. Even the galley and the lavatories were fully functional.
And we basically took a flight. They had sound and the lighting and everything was all worked out. It was going to fly so still that you could have a glass of wine on your table and it wouldn't spill and things. Because airplanes, before that was not the case.
The design for the 707 was a great success, introducing features for the first time in aircraft that became standard in future designs. More passenger windows, individual controls for air and lighting for each seat.
They designed in these recessed skylights, and the lighting would change from being indirect lighting, and you would have dawn and daylight and nighttime with stars and everything, and I remember that very specifically. It was very exciting. I mean, the jets, commercial jet travel had not happened yet, and this was the first experience we had with it. It was fabulous.
Teague was invited by the Industrial Designers Institute to give a speech about design. He was highly respected by American designers for being one of their founding fathers, a pioneer, the elder statesman of their profession. the auditorium was packed, as they knew it may be their last chance to hear him speak.
There is an ingredient of really good design which is unpredictable and delightful and can't be worked out by any deductive method. It is the personal flash of inspiration which the designer contributes out of his inner resources, which arouses the keen sense of pleasure we call beauty. The kind of beauty we are called on to create must be an outward and visual interpretation of the inner values of the object designed. It must make this revelation by means of the forms essential to the object, and not by any extraneous distracting additions. We weld these diverse parts together into a rhythmic, beautifully proportioned whole by our handling of its necessary shapes and lines. Thus the object acquires a vitality of its own, and its own very special individual beauty.
Soon after, at 76 years old, Teague's smoking habit was taking its toll. Emphysema was ravaging his lungs, and he had so much difficulty breathing, he had to enter the hospital. Teague eventually did give credit for his son's design work on the Marmon 16. In his book Design This Day, in his lectures, and in Road and Track magazine, perhaps as a gesture of peace with his son. A son that he was proud of, yet rarely got along with. And Dorwin, later in life, admitted that he owed much to his father.
While it was frustrating to be denied full recognition for the car design, it was better than not having the opportunity to do them at all. Without my father, all this never would have happened.
I believe it is the designer's responsibility to be as courageous as he is conscientious. He must be tactful and patient, but he must also be hard and unyielding in matters of principle. He must be adequately vocal and able to convince his clients of the soundness of his methods and the rightness of his solutions. He must have deep respect for his public, the ultimate consumer. The designer should be aware of and sensitive to the trends that are moving in this small, communicative world of ours. It is the voice of your times speaking to you, and your sensitivity to this spirit of your age is your greatest asset. The men who count heads and add up answers to questionnaires can produce no creative additive for your use. The people they question haven't yet seen the thing that is going to thrill and excite them, and it is your job to reveal it to them.